I'm Phil Hellmuth. Many players believe it's important to consistently defend their blinds. These players are worried about getting run over, and they hate getting bluffed out of a pot. When you're sitting in the blinds, should you stay or should you go now? I know, Kinks reference. I wrote it. In this lesson, we'll give you some tactics that will help you determine when it's best to play from the blinds and when it's best to give it up. When you have chips in the pot, it's hard to let them go. Like never leaving a soldier behind, some people play every hand from the blinds, and when they bust out of every poker tournament they play in, they ask, why me? Why you? Because you played every frickin' hand from the blinds, man. You got to learn to fold. Well, you do not want to defend in the blinds very often. You cannot fold your hand every time and have your opponents think that you're the soft spot at the table, that you're the soft blind, that they can steal every round. So, how do you determine when your blinds are worth protecting and when they're worth throwing away? Let's start by looking at the small blind. Let's say we're in a tournament where the blinds are 15-30 and every player starts with 1,500 in chips. Say we're holding King 7 offsuit in the small blind, and when the action folds to us, what should we do? In this case, calling or raising is the right play because against another random hand, chances are King 7 is still ahead. You're never going to fold. Although I may call on the spot, for you a raise is better. Being aggressive in the small blind is important because limping, or calling like I might do, gives your opponent a chance to see the flop for free or cheap or worse, raise you and force you to fold your King 7. So you raise it. Now, let's say we're holding Ace 10 in the small blind and the player in the cutoff raises to 90. Let's take a look at our options. Our first option is to fold. If our opponent has been playing really tight, we give them a lot of credit for holding a real hand. Folding our small blind may be a viable option, but you won't see me do it very often. Our second option, and our most probable best option, is to re-raise it. By re-raising, we are likely to win the pot pre-flop when both of our opponents fold their hands. Even if the player in the cutoff does call, he'll have to give us credit for having a big hand, and he'll most likely proceed with caution unless he connects very strongly with the flop. Our third option in the hand is to just flat call the cutoff's raise. Why is calling bad? Because it does nothing to define the strength of our hand or those of our opponents. If we call, we're giving the big blind the right odds to call with almost any two cards, and unless we hit the flop, we'll have no idea of where we stand. Even if we flop top pair, we're going to have to be cautious because there's a decent chance that we're beat. What's more, just calling the cutoff's raise gives the big blind the opportunity to re-raise and push us out of the pot before the flop even hits the felt. In the big blind, most of the time we'll be facing decisions that are quite hard. Since many of your opponents are going to be looking for opportunities to steal the blinds, you're going to have to be willing to defend by calling raises or re-raising with spec hands from time to time. In some cases, if you think your opponent is particularly weak, you may even want to re-raise from the big blind in order to re-steal the pot. That's what I do, baby. Re-steal. In those cases where you're not re-raising, take your opponent's aggressiveness into account. If you hit the flop with your spec hand and you know your opponent is likely to make a C-bet, then why don't you just sit back and check and then call or raise when he bets in order to get that C-bet in there. The correct way to play the hand will almost always depend entirely upon who your opponent is and what you know about him. What's more, by defending your blinds a few times, you'll discourage your opponents from trying to steal your blinds as often because they'll know you're willing to put up a fight. You're going to go with them to post-flop decisions. Finally, remember that as the big blind, you have position on the small blind. If the small blind limps, you may want to be aggressive and raise in order to take the pot away before the flop, even if you're holding a weak hand. On the other hand, if the small blind raises, your position also means that you can call with a wide variety of hands and then take the pot if your opponent shows any weakness after the flop.